Zorak the Ruthless snarled, the scar twisting his lip further as his face contorted. Around him, his elite troops bristled with blades and blasters, their eyes narrowed against the swirling sands of the desert planet Zerath. "We picked up their energy signature," his lieutenant Karash rumbled. "The cowards have stopped running. Weaklings always do." Zorak spat into the gritty wind. It had been weeks of pursuit. It was an easy mission, or so he'd thought. Crush a colony of weak, fleshy creatures, take the resources, and then return to the glory of conquest on the next hapless world. But these strange pink-skinned beings, these humans, had been elusive. "Perhaps," Zorak sneered, his voice a rasp. "They finally tire of fleeing a superior force. Let us end this." Hours later, the hunters stalked through a maze of twisted rock, finding not a cowering city, but something far stranger. Under the harsh glare of 2 moons, a circle of gaudy structures stood in defiance of the barren desert. Flags whipped in the wind, bold with symbols Zorak didn't understand. A flicker of movement on a balcony caught his eye. With a roar, he led the charge. The closer they got, the odder the scene. The buildings were makeshift, painted canvas and wood. Figures darted in and out, humans, but dressed in flowing robes and shimmering fabrics, faces painted in bizarre swirls of color. "This is their stronghold?" Karash's gravelly voice echoed Zorak's confusion. "It looks like a place of play." As they stormed the perimeter, a shriek split the air, not of fear, but of a trained and powerful voice. A single human woman stood upon what must have been a stage, arms outstretched. "Oh, Romeo, heartless Romeo, why would you poison yourself for a misunderstanding?" she wailed. Zorak halted, the tip of his blade inches from her neck. What trickery was this? The woman stared past them, oblivious to the threat, as if seeing a vast crowd. Her voice thundered into the night. "A plague on both your houses! Their petty feuds have cost my beloved." Silent, the warriors watched. Human males postured and ranted on other stages, their voices filled with a passion challenging to fathom. Some scenes were of anger, yet others were they jesting? Beings draped in ridiculous costumes tripped and tumbled, and Zorak's troops, unknowingly, began to twitch their lips in amusement. Zorak had seen enough. He signaled his men to back away, not out of respect, but because confusion was too profound to ignore. He glanced at Karash, seeing the same bewilderment mirrored back at him. "What is this madness?" Zorak hissed, the translator in his helmet turning his native tongue into crude human speech. The woman who had railed against Romeo spun, finally acknowledging them. No fear was on her face. Instead, her eyes held the gleam of a fanatic. "Behold!" she cried, extending a hand towards the painted backdrop. "The timeless tale of star-crossed lovers, brought to life before your very eyes." The human was explaining. Her energy was infectious. Zorak found himself studying the scene with a predator's detached fascination. There were painted trees and a balcony, crude, yes, but it set a place. "We are but players," a deep male voice boomed from another makeshift stage. His face was painted a sickly white, and his robes were the color of dried blood. "We mimic your battles and your passions, so that you may better understand them." Zorak growled, finding the logic twisted yet somehow not wrong. Their most brutal warlords had often held grotesque reenactments of victories, a display of power to strike fear into their enemies. The warrior woman approached, not a weapon in sight. She gestured gracefully at the scene before them. "We call this theatre. It shows truth through fiction. Does your kind not tell stories, sing songs?" Karash, bold as always, scoffed. "We sing of victory. We tell tales to make our children strong." "Indeed," the woman touched her chest. as do we. To be moved, angered, to laugh. Is this not the strength of a different kind? Zorak remained motionless, caught uncomfortably in the net of an idea too foreign to dismiss easily. These humans did not cower. They painted, sang, and performed with audacity. Were they warriors of a different sort, their battles fought on stages, not battlefields. For days, Zorak and his warriors observed a strange truce settling over the desert camp. They ate the simple human rations, slept under the canvas roofs, and witnessed these extraordinary displays. They saw tales of love and loss, of heroes, villains, and even fools that made them laugh out loud. The stories weren't always pleasant. Some were dark, some twisted, and some so painfully truthful they were like a knife slipping between ribs. Zorak was not a fool. He knew this was dangerous. With her painted face and booming voice, that strange woman was weaving a spell around them. She made his hardened crew ponder things his war masters would have whipped them for even considering. Yet, try as he might, he couldn't entirely despise it. Their own stories were simple, good against evil, the strong prevailing. But here, there was complexity. There were shades of grey. Even his battle-hardened mind struggled to fit around. Finally, one night, the troupe performed their grand finale. Zorak hadn't realized how invested he'd become, until he gripped the edge of his rough seat. On stage, armies clashed not with laser and blade, but with words. The old and weary human king argued with his fierce young heir. It was about war, sacrifice, and the lines even the righteous sometimes crossed. When the play ended, there was silence. None of the warriors clapped, yet as Zorak scanned his men, he saw something was broken. No longer were they just hunters. There was a flicker of doubt. "Well," he finally grunted, standing. "Humans are not as weak as we believed." Lies were a weapon, but half-truths were also a weapon. The painted woman beamed. "We have our own strength, warrior, and perhaps now you see it." He had a choice. Tell the truth, admit humans were not the orcs of legend, and risk his troops becoming enthralled by these alien arts instead of conquest. Or he could keep the myth of human brutality alive. After all, fear drove his armies, a fear that might dwindle if the truth was known. Zorak was no fool. Returning home, he painted a picture of savage resistance, of a barbaric species nearly equal in ferocity. His war masters were pleased. Fear was the best fuel for their armies. However, he took a risk. Hidden among the tales of human valor were seeds of doubt, descriptions of battle formations oddly elegant, and weapons described as wielded with an almost artistic flair. Years passed. Zorak rose in the ranks, his reputation for conquering the human threat unmatched. Yet he never forgot the painted faces. He had translators secretly dissect the plays, searching for something. He wasn't sure what. Then a change rippled through the empire. Uprisings, not on conquered worlds, but within their own kind. The warlords were baffled. Then came the reports. Strange symbols found at rebel camps, symbols matching those on the flags in the human desert. Crude plays started appearing, mimicking not battles but the clashes in the Senate and the corruption of their own leaders. Zorak knew the truth then. The humans had poisoned them, not with weapons, but something far more potent. The idea of more than just conquest, more than blind obedience. At any point he could reveal the falsehood and crush this spark of rebellion. Yet, an unfamiliar feeling grew in his chest. Was this spark? Was it wrong? The plays kept echoing in his head. They spoke of honor, choices, things his world had ground into dust long ago. His lie had taken on a life of its own, turning humans into myths, a myth inspiring change. One night, alone in his quarters, Zorak made a decision. He contacted one of the rebel leaders through highly questionable channels. The message was coded, disguised as battle plans. But within those plans lay references, names from the plays, and lines spoken by kings and fools. Would they understand? Would they grasp that the Space Orcs were a lie? He didn't know, but the act of sending it, of choosing to fan that flame and not extinguish it, it felt like a play of his own making. He was, in his way, now an actor upon a far grander stage. Zorak never knew if his message was understood or even received. The galaxy spiraled into chaos he had never anticipated. Rebellions tore the Empire apart, fueled by strange human stories and the spark of defiance they'd lit. He fought, of course, out of habit and old loyalty. But the battles were different now. The thrill of conquest had soured. He found himself looking for the play actors on the battlefield, for symbols matching the fluttering flags he'd once scorned. The end didn't come on some grand battlefield, but in a dusty, abandoned colony. It was him against a young human, barely older than a whelp. The human's weapon was crude, their fear palpable, but their eyes held the same gleam as the woman who had cried for her, Romeo, under the desert moons. "Why?" Zorak rasped, lowering his blade. The human would not have understood had he spoken in his own tongue. "Why?" the human echoed back, then grinned, an audacious flash of white teeth. "For the stories, old beast. For the chance to make our own." With that the human charged, not with the skill of a trained warrior, but with the wild abandon of someone who believed in something more than orders. Zorak's blade never rose. He felt the sting of the human weapon, the hot rush of his own blood, and a strange sense of rightness. As his vision faded, his last glimpse wasn't the harsh desert or the human's surprised face. Instead, he saw the makeshift stage, the gaudy costumes, the painted faces, all under the endless spread of stars. Perhaps, in the grand story of the galaxy, he'd played his part well, the villain who made room for a new kind of hero to be born. And if some future playwright penned a tale of it all, Zorak hoped they'd paint him a scene of death as dramatic as any he'd witnessed on that strange human stage.